I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window of my penthouse, sipping my morning coffee, when my phone buzzed. The message was short, casual, but it hit me like a punch to the stomach. Mom has your house key now. Ryan. Ryan. My husband. My partner. My supposed confidant. I stared at the text, feeling the silk of my blouse cling uncomfortably to my skin, my fingers tightening around the porcelain cup. How long had he planned this? How many times had he invited her in while I wasn't home? The skyline of the city stretched below me, a sea of possibility I'd fought tooth and nail to reach. And yet, this violation of trust, made the golden view suddenly feel hollow. I let out a slow, measured breath, tasting the iron tang of anger and betrayal. Pride, too. I had built a life, a name, an empire, without asking for permission. And yet here they were, trying to pretend my boundaries didn't matter. The ding of my phone jolted me again. A new thought crystallized, sharp and daring. If he thinks this is a game, I'll raise the stakes. I smiled, quietly, dangerously. Today, I wasn't just confronting a betrayal. I was reclaiming my power. I remember the first time I felt truly invisible in my own marriage. It was a Sunday afternoon, sunlight spilling lazily through the living room windows. I had just finished arranging fresh flowers in a vase, a little ritual that always grounded me, and Ryan had invited his mother over without telling me. I'd heard the click of the door before I even saw her. Samantha, my mother-in-law's voice rang, saccharine and sharp at once. She didn't wait for a greeting. She walked in, hands on her hips, and immediately began criticizing the way I'd organized the house. I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar lump in my throat, the tightening of my hands at my sides. I just finished, I said softly. Oh, I know, she said, tilting her head with a patronizing smile. But Ryan and I thought it could use a little improvement. I remember the sting of humiliation that day, not just from her words, but from Ryan's silence. He didn't defend me. He didn't even glance my way. He just sat on the couch, scrolling his phone as if none of it mattered. I wanted to shout, to cry, to demand respect, but instead, I walked to the kitchen, my hands trembling so violently that I nearly dropped the vase. That's when I found it, my grandmother's old silver locket, tucked away in a drawer I rarely opened. She had given it to me the day I left for college, her eyes shining with that quiet fire she always had. Never let anyone tell you your worth, Sam. Your power is yours and yours alone. That locket burned against my palm like a spark of rebellion. I knew in that moment that my life could no longer be dictated by someone else's whims. Not my mother-in-law, not Ryan, and certainly not societal expectations of who I should be. By that evening, I made a decision. I would leave the passive role I'd been assigned. I would work, save, and build a life that no one could undermine. I would prove, not just to them, but to myself, that my worth was immeasurable. The memory still stings, but now it fuels me. Every step I've taken since then has been on my terms, every victory mine alone. And now, with Ryan's betrayal, that old fire is roaring to life again, stronger, sharper, unstoppable. After that pivotal day with the locket clutched in my hand, I began laying the foundations of a life no one could touch. I started small, freelance consulting, late nights hunched over spreadsheets, learning the language of investment and entrepreneurship. My apartment became a war room, cluttered with notebooks, market analyses, and half-empty mugs of coffee. I met Martin Caldwell at a networking event, an older man with a keen eye for talent and a stubborn belief that women could dominate spaces men thought they owned. He became my mentor, guiding me through the labyrinth of finance, teaching me to negotiate, invest, and trust my instincts. Sam, he said once, handing me a portfolio, the world doesn't hand power to anyone. You take it. I did. The first few months were grueling. Rejection emails, failed pitches, clients who doubted my expertise because of my age, my gender, my quiet demeanor. Nights blurred into mornings. I'd wake at 4 a.m., energized by a mix of determination and stubborn pride, often staring at the city skyline, imagining the life I would build. Slowly, victories arrived. My first big client was a small tech startup willing to take a chance on me. The thrill of signing that contract, seeing my bank account swell for the first time with a number that felt untouchable, sent shivers down my spine. Then came the first profitable deal, the first major recognition in a trade magazine, the subtle nods of respect from peers who once ignored me. Yet I kept it all under wraps. My social media was modest, carefully curated images of lunches or books I was reading, never showing the deals, never revealing the wealth I was amassing. My family and friends thought I was just working hard. They had no idea that I was quietly constructing an empire worth millions, a life I could control entirely. Every achievement carried a lesson. I learned patience, discretion, and the weight of strategic silence. I reveled in small victories privately. The first time my grandmother's locket sparkled in the morning light on my dresser, the quiet satisfaction of seeing my bank balance grow without anyone else's interference. And yet, underneath it all, there was a simmering sense of anticipation, a readiness for the day I could confront those who underestimated me. Ryan giving his mother a key was just a spark. I had been preparing for the wildfire. By the time I reached my current standing, a portfolio worth millions, multiple properties, and a network that could rival some of the city's top players, I had transformed from the woman dismissed by her husband and his mother into someone untouchable. And now, the time had come to bring that power full circle, to reclaim what was mine in a way that would leave no doubt. The black SUV pulled up outside my mother-in-law's house, its sleek lines reflecting the late afternoon sun. I adjusted my tailored navy blazer, feeling the cool leather of my gloves, and glanced at the officer in the passenger seat. A professional nod of readiness exchanged between us. In the back, a briefcase rested on the seat beside me. $10 million in crisp, secure envelopes. Not a bribe. A statement. I stepped onto the porch, heels clicking firmly against the stone steps. The door swung open before I could even knock. "Samantha," my mother-in-law said, eyes wide, hand frozen midair. Ryan trailed behind her, slack-jawed and pale. The officer lingered discreetly behind me, a silent shield of authority. I smiled, polite, controlled, dangerous. "Hello," I said, voice smooth, yet carrying a weight that made them falter. "I hear you have my house key." Their disbelief was almost comical. Ryan opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't form. I took a deliberate step inside, letting the house's familiar decor, the floral curtains, antique furniture, polished floors, wash over me. This was their territory. Yet for the first time, I felt no trepidation, only control. I set the briefcase on the coffee table and unfastened it slowly. "This," I said, letting my gaze linger on each of them, "is the cost of underestimating me." I opened the lid to reveal the stacks of bills. Ryan's mother gasped. Ryan's hand went to his mouth. $10,000,000,000. I continued, my voice even. "The money isn't for you. It's a symbol of what I built while everyone else assumed I was helpless, naive, or powerless." I let the pause stretch. Their eyes darted around, taking in the subtle cues of my journey, the luxurious watch glinting on my wrist, the confidence in my posture, the aura of someone who commands her world. "You thought giving her a key to my house was harmless," I said, looking at Ryan. "You thought I wouldn't notice, wouldn't act. But this is your first and last lesson in what happens when my boundaries are crossed." I could see it in their faces. The creeping shame, the disbelief, the flicker of guilt that no apology could erase. My mother-in-law's hands trembled as she reached for a tissue. Ryan's jaw tightened, realizing for the first time that I wasn't the same woman he'd married. "I own my life," I said, voice unwavering. "I control my finances, my property, and my decisions. And if anyone believes that a key or a casual intrusion can diminish that, they're gravely mistaken." The room fell silent. Even the officer's breathing seemed measured, waiting for me to finish my statement. I closed the briefcase slowly, letting the sound echo, a punctuation mark on the revelation. They were stunned. Not by the money, not by the police presence, but by me. The woman they assumed could be intimidated, manipulated, or dismissed. The woman standing before them was untouchable, unshakable, and utterly self-sufficient. I stepped back, letting my eyes meet theirs one last time. "I hope you understand now," I said softly, almost kindly, "that underestimating someone's worth comes at a price. And sometimes that price is immeasurable." I folded my arms and let the silence stretch just long enough to make the weight of my presence undeniable. Ryan and his mother flinched under the scrutiny of my gaze, the authority in my posture, and the quiet knowledge that I could leave, or stay on my terms. "Here's the reality," I began, voice calm but firm, carrying the resonance of someone who had clawed her way to the top. "You want to be part of my life, or my world, then there are rules, boundaries, respect, and yes, consequences if those rules are ignored." Ryan's mother opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "Let me finish. First, Ryan, you will never, ever undermine me in my own home again. Apologies aren't enough. You need to prove that you can support and respect me as a partner, not as someone whose authority can be toyed with." My words were precise, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Then his mother. "You will not enter my home, make decisions on my behalf, or assume access to my life without invitation. This includes physical presence, communication with my staff, or interference in my personal affairs. Respect is earned, not granted." I reached for the briefcase, lifting it just slightly. "And yes, the money," I said, letting each word land deliberately, "comes with conditions. You will not touch a dime unless you commit to honesty, accountability, and a willingness to grow. No more toxicity, no more manipulation, no more excuses." I paused, letting them absorb it. There was shock, awe, and finally, a glimmer of understanding. I softened slightly, letting compassion thread through my firmness. "I'm not cruel. I'm not vengeful. I want you to change, to become better versions of yourselves. But the path forward is rules, and I will enforce them. I care about family, but I won't allow the past to repeat itself." Ryan swallowed, voice low. "Samantha, I didn't realize." "You didn't realize because you never stopped to think," I interrupted gently. "Now, you have the chance to make it right. And believe me, I will notice. Every action, every word, every choice. You will not just say you are changing, you will show it. And if you fail, well, you know the consequences." For the first time, I saw comprehension in their eyes. A flicker of humility, of recognition. They were beginning to understand that the power dynamic had shifted. Not out of malice, but because I had built myself into someone they could not manipulate, ignore, or dismiss. I leaned back slightly, letting a small, satisfied smile curve my lips. "This isn't just about money or keys. This is about respect, about accountability, about growth. And if you're willing to accept these terms, we can start rebuilding. But I am in charge. And don't forget it." The room was quiet again, but this time, the tension had changed. It was no longer fear alone. It was the dawning awareness that I had won, and that my boundaries, once ignored, were now unbreakable. Weeks passed after the confrontation. The tension in my mother-in-law's house began to ease, not because the threat of police or money lingered, but because the boundaries I set were now respected. Ryan changed first slowly, cautiously, but genuinely. He stopped undermining me, began listening, and even offered support in ways he never had before. His mother was more complicated. She struggled at first, caught between old habits and the new rules of engagement I enforced. But I saw glimpses of change. She asked questions instead of dictating answers, waited for invitations instead of barging in, and most importantly, she apologized, not just for my sake, but for her own understanding of what she'd done wrong. I watched them both evolve with a quiet satisfaction. My power hadn't been about control or revenge. It had been about creating a framework for respect, accountability, and genuine growth. And it worked. Slowly, they were becoming people who could coexist in my life without undermining me, people I could genuinely forgive. I sat in my penthouse one evening, the city lights twinkling below, and held my grandmother's silver locket in my hand. The same locket that had reminded me, years ago, that my worth was mine alone. It felt heavier now, not with burden, but with the weight of everything I'd accomplished, the pain endured, the nights I spent doubting myself, the triumphs I had quietly celebrated. I smiled, remembering her words. Never let anyone tell you your worth. Your power is yours and yours alone. How true they had become. I had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and underestimation, and emerged stronger, wiser, and unshakable. As I set the locket down on the polished glass table, I felt a sense of completion. This wasn't the end of my journey. Growth never truly ends, but it was a definitive chapter closed with grace, strength, and a sense of empowerment that could not be challenged. I thought of the city below, the lives I touched, the empire I had quietly built. I thought of the people who had doubted me, and the boundaries I had established. And I knew, deep in my bones, that no key, no betrayal, and no disrespect could ever compromise me again. I leaned back in my chair, letting the night settle around me, and whispered to myself, a final affirmation of strength, independence, and grace. I am mine, always.